All right, let's get going. So we are here to have fun with a coding session. We're going to be coding a whack-a-bug, so kind of like the whack-a-mole arcade game, except we're all software developers here, right? So it's whack-a-bug, a little bit more tongue-in-cheek of a joke. Who's here? My name is Giorgio. I'm the UK Country Operations Coordinator here at Boolean UK. It's actually Boolean Europe now because we offer our courses all across Europe. And we have one of our wonderful, terrific, all-star teachers, Nathan King, who's teacher here at Boolean, who'll be running the workshop for us. In case you've never come across us, don't know who we are, might be a little curious, I'm going to share a little bit more about what Boolean is. We are an international tech academy. We help people start new careers in the tech industry. Our focus is on live online classes with expert teachers and a practical focused approach to learning. So our curriculum is very practice focused and very practice heavy. Once you're done with the course, we provide 6 months of career support to help you find a job so you can launch your career in tech. Now, a few numbers since our inception in 2017, in which we've been pioneers in full remote learning long before COVID forced the rest of the world to do so. We just felt it was the best way to give the greatest access to high quality content as possible. Since then, we've had over 4,000 students come through Boolean and be a part of the Boolean family with a wonderful post-course hiring rate of 95%, thanks to our 6 months of career support, but also thanks to our wonderful students and our wonderful teaching staff that helps people in their journeys. Talk a little bit about 2 of our courses specifically this evening. So we have a full stack software development course. It covers both front-end and back-end software development, and it is a full-time course. Now, what that means is there's 2 sessions per day, Mondays through Fridays. There's a morning teaching session from 9:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. UK time, which is live and online. Everything is remote, but everything is designed to be live with your teachers, like Nathan and your wonderful classmates. You can create those real relationships and those dialogues. In case you have a question, there's actually someone there live to help you. Then you'll break for lunch. In the afternoon, you have a practice session from 2:30 to 6 p.m. UK time, where you'll be challenged to put into practice what you've learned in the morning session. So you'll be doing exercises, tasks, and objectives to make sure that you know how to use the tools and the concepts and the theories that you learned in the morning session. Again, that's full time for 6 months, Monday through Fridays, 2 sessions a day. And this is what the full stack software development course curriculum covers. You'll start with some programming fundamentals, get into user interfaces, then you'll focus on front-end development with React. Then you'll finish the front-end portion of the course with a front-end app that you'll build on your own. Then you get into the back-end part of these full stack software development course. So you'll go through different development approaches, you'll cover APIs and data stores, you'll do a team dev simulation project, which simulates real world experiences. And then you'll have interview prep the last couple weeks of the course, along with a final project that you'll be building, which will be your own full stack web app. The second course I'd like to present this evening is a front-end development course. So it's the same as the full stack development course in terms of it being full-time, except that it's only 3 months because you'll cover the front-end portion of the full stack software development course. Again, full-time means 2 sessions a day, Mondays through Fridays, that morning teaching session with Nathan and your wonderful classmates, and the afternoon practice session where you'll be putting into practice what you've learned in the morning session. And the curriculum is exactly the same as the full stack software development course, except that once you finish the first half of the course, front-end development course, you'll be finishing with that portfolio front-end app. You'll be moving into the career service portion of the Boolean experience. Now, I want to share a little bit more about our approach here at Boolean. You'll start from scratch. So even if you've never written a line of code, don't have really any experience in computer programming, but you have a little passion, a little curiosity, it's completely fine. This course is designed to teach you as a beginner, right? So you can start from scratch. We'll teach you everything you need to know. Then, because you get to learn from senior developers like Nathan, who have experience in the field, who are industry experts, you can experience live online classes with them, learning from people who really have done it for a long time in the industry. And then, as I mentioned earlier, our curriculum is really focused on that practical experience. So you'll mix theory with practice. You do live coding and daily challenges that are inspired by real world problems. So when you get into the job force, you know how to be a developer. You know what you're doing. You can walk the walk and you can talk the talk. And then, as I mentioned, once you finish with the course, whether it's the front end or the full stack software development course, you have access to Boolean career services. And it's essentially are accompanying you in the job search. And this is how we support you. So you have access to these career resources at all times, even on day one of the actual course. Then once you get to the career service portion of your Boolean experience, you have support with the fundamentals, right? Creating your CV, your LinkedIn profile, preparing a portfolio, understanding where to look for jobs on different job boards, how to network effectively on those job boards, like LinkedIn, for example, support with applying for jobs, right? Understanding what you need to write, how to answer questions, how to fill out job applications. Then once you get invited to an interview, you have interview practice. Then you have tech skills workshops every week to make sure that your tech skills remain sharp as you go through the job search, so you never stop learning and you're prepared for the tech tests that are part of the interview process. You get career coaching to help understand really what type of companies, what type of roles are good fits for you. And you have that one-on-one support as you go through the career service experience from our career advisors. Just wanted to give a quick synopsis, quick overview of some of the companies where our students have been hired. This is among my favorite slides because it is really a simple and visual representation of, I guess, validation of all the hard work of our teaching team and our wonderful students that is then validated once a company hires you, because it really is coming full circle from being courageous to jump into something new or something that you're passionate about, like software development, learning the necessary skills, going through the job search and finding a job. It's really, truly something special. We really, truly are passionate about helping you reach your full potential and achieve your goals. Quick point about some of the course costs. Now, I'll start with the front-end development. That full-time front-end development course, there's two different payment options. There's the upfront option, which is a lump sum before the course begins. It's the simplest option. It is £5,500 or 6,900 euros. If you prefer to spread that out over an installment plan, we have installment plans from 6 months up to 48 months, 0% interest. So you only pay for the actual course cost and you could spread it out over a long period of time. For the front end course, it's £6,000 total or 7,400 euros for that long-term installment plan. Now, for the full-time full stack software development course, there's a third option. So in addition to the upfront payment option, which is £9,400 or 11,000 euros, you have that same installment option, 6-month installments up to 48-month installments, 0% interest. No worries about that. That is a total of £9,900 or 11,800 euros. The last option is what we call the pay later option. It's also known as a future earnings agreement, and it's essentially an agreement between the student and us at Boolean, where in exchange for you only making a small initial deposit of £750 or 750 euros, you agree to share a percentage of your future income, whatever that income may be, as long as you're earning more than a certain minimum amount. That's what the pay later option is, and it's available to anybody across Europe or the UK, as long as you're an EU or a UK resident. Now, what we wanted to do also, because we truly believe in what codebar is doing, we want to give a little extra incentive. So for all of you wonderful codebar members who are joining us this evening, you get an extra £500 or 500 euro discount on your Boolean application because we think you're wonderful and we're really happy to spend this evening with you. And just so you know, the next upcoming class starts February 12th. That's both the front end and the full stack software development course, February 12th, and you have access to that exclusive discount on your application. Now, if you're curious, if you want to know a little bit more about Boolean, I highly recommend you start the application process. It's quick, it's easy, it's free, and it could be the conversation, it could be those few clicks that truly changes your life. The first step is simply filling out an online form, just telling us who you are, why you want to join Boolean. Then you'll pass a really simple 15-minute logic test. Once you pass that test, you'll be invited to an admissions call, a video call or a phone call to determine with our admissions advisors if Boolean is the right choice for you in helping to achieve your goals. Once that's the case, and you feel like this is the course you want to take, both literally and figuratively for your life, you'll enroll and you'll become a Booleaner, just like those 4,000 students or more that have done so in the past. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will stop talking because I'm not the star of the show. The star of the show, as we mentioned, is our wonderful teacher, Nathan King, who is going to be walking us through a really fun Whack-A-Bug arcade game. If you have any questions, I'll leave my email in the chat. You can find us online at boolean.co.uk. Really appreciate you listening to me talking. I know I talk quite a bit, but I try to go as quickly as possible. And I'll hand the microphone now over to you, Nathan. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Giorgio. Hi, everyone. Let's build something. So real quick, before we start building something, you probably want to have a bit of assurance about who I am. So I'm Nathan. I've been a Boolean for about 2.5 years. And before that, I've been a software developer for about 12 years, starting to lose count at this point. I've done projects for Microsoft, for the NHS, for Accenture. I've done some stuff for Odeon Cinemas. I've been in the crypto industry. So I've been kind of all over the place and gathered quite a bit of various different experiences. We have limited time tonight, so I'm going to try and do this within an hour. Which unfortunately means I'm probably not going to be able to explain everything in a lot of depth, but I'm going to try and explain what I can with the time that we have. There's no software that you need to install. All that you need is a Chromium-based web browser. So that means, unfortunately, Firefox is not going to work for this. You're going to need Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge or Brave. I don't think Safari will work for this either. I'm going to share a link in the Zoom chat right now. And all you need to do is click that link, open it in Chrome or Brave or Microsoft Edge. Everything's set up there ready. We have some images in there. I'm going to share my screen so you'll be able to see what we're working with. You should see something like this. And this is all we're going to need. So I'll go over what we can see here. On the left-hand side, we've got a list of files. We have an index.html, we've got a script.js, and we've got a style.css. This is the files we're going to write our code in. There's a little bit of HTML in here already, just so that we can get started quickly. There's also an images directory with a couple of images in here. We've got one called bug splat, which is a nice little blood splat. And then we've got a bug, which we're going to be using. On the right-hand side, we've got a big white square, and that's essentially our website. That's what we're going to see. That's where everything is going to appear as we're building it. On the bottom of that, we've got a little console window down here. This is just where we can output anything that might be interesting or useful to us when we're writing our JavaScript code. I'm going to bring that down just for now so we've got some more space. And then the bit in the middle, this is the bit we're all interested in. This is where we're going to be writing our code. So the style sheet is empty. The script file is empty. We're going to fill this up with a bunch of logic and a bunch of styles. But before we get to any of that, we need to start writing some actual HTML so we can see something on the page. So what I'm going to do here is this green thing right here is called a comment. This means that the browser doesn't render it. It just completely ignores it. It's just a note for the developers. Just above that and below this opening body tag, I'm just going to add a few empty lines in here, just so we've got a bit of room to work with. And all of the code that I write is going to be in this space here, below this body tag and above this little comment here. As soon as you make any changes to the file in your browser, that is going to create what's called a fork of the project. So it's your own personal version of the code base, and you are free to change things and add things, and it's only going to affect you. So don't worry about it messing with what's going on here. Follow along, or you can just sit back and watch, whichever you'd like to do. So just to demonstrate how this actually works, I'm going to collapse my little file explorer on the left, so we've got some more room, and I'm just going to add a little HTML element here. And the way I'm going to do that is with some angle brackets, and inside the angle brackets, I'm going to put the letter P. And then after that, I'm going to put some more angle brackets, and in that, I'm going to put /P. This is a HTML element now. The P stands for paragraph. This is how you display text on a web page. So we can type anything in here, as is tradition, hello world. And we'll see that on the right-hand side over here. It refreshes as soon as we save the file. This is essentially what we're going to be doing going forward. So everything in a HTML file you can think of is essentially just a single component or a single tag or a single element, and you can nest elements inside of each other to build kind of a skeleton, a structure of a web page or a web app. You can think of it kind of like the skeleton in the human body. The style sheet is the beautiful skin on a human. It's the thing that makes it look nice. And then JavaScript you can think of as the brain that does all of the logic and the thinking and makes us actually do things. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a HTML element called a div, a div. I'm going to close that with a closing tag. Pretty much every HTML element needs an opening tag and a closing tag so you can put things inside of it. There are some exceptions. And what I'm going to do here is I am going to add on to this little tag here. So after the div word, I'm going to put something in here called class, then an equal sign, and then 2 double quotes. What I'm doing here is I'm adding an attribute to this HTML element. What I can do with this is I can say, put anything in here. I'm going to say board. This div is going to be my game board. And since I've put this in here, in my style sheet, I can target this HTML element directly and then make it do something or make it look a certain way. So for now, I'm just going to leave it like this. I'll put the word hello in here maybe so we can see that. And I'm going to jump over to my style sheet. And when I jump over to my style sheet, I'm going to try and target that element that I made. So I'm going to use a dot, which is a class selector. So this is the class property on a HTML element. I'm going to use a dot and then board, and then a couple of curly braces, opening and closing curly braces. This is now a section of CSS. And what I can do here is I can say, give it a height of 50 pixels, 50 px. So we do this by doing the word height, then a colon, and then 50 pixels, and then a semicolon to close off that line. You can think of that like a period in a sentence. I can do the same thing with a width. Let's say 50 pixels as well. And then let's also give it a background dash color. You will get some autocomplete in here, which should be helpful. And let's just say red. And we've got a red square on the screen. Fantastic. The next thing I'm going to do is above this CSS class, I am going to target the body of the page directly. So there is no dot here. It's just the word body. That's targeting this HTML element, the body element. And in here, I'm going to add a background color of, let's say, blue. We get the entire page in blue. Now I have what's called a hex code, which is going to slightly change the shade of blue. You don't have to type this out. This is just a way to very specifically target a specific color. You can just go with blue. And then the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to, you see this little red square, there's a bit of a border around it. There's a bit of empty space around it. This happens by default with every HTML page. Usually what we want to do first thing is just get rid of that little guttering so that we can define our own little spacing around the app. The way I'm going to do that right at the top of the CSS file is do an asterisk and then some opening and closing curly braces. This is going to target everything, the entire page. The asterisk is like a select all. kind of deal. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a margin property to it and set the margin to 0. And then we see that this little square now is clamped to the top left of the screen with no space around it whatsoever. This is what we want. Cool. So let's start adding something that's actually useful to the app. I'm going to get rid of this background color on this board and the height and the width. We'll add some more styles here in a second. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some more HTML elements. So I've got a game board, and my game board is going to have 2 areas. It's going to have a game area where the actual whack-a-mole is, and it's going to have an area where we'll put some text to say what the score is and put a countdown timer, things like that. So I'm going to create another div here. I'm going to give it a class, and I'm going to call this class, let's say, game area. And then I'm going to close off that div. Then underneath that div, I'm going to add another one with a class of, let's say, game data. And then I'm going to close off that div. So now we have 2 HTML elements in here where we can start putting some things. And let's add a few more divs in here. So we want to do whack-a-mole. We're probably going to want some kind of grid. I think probably a 3x3 grid is good. So I'm going to add a div in here, and I'm going to give it a class of grid. And we will style this up in a second. And then inside that grid, I'm going to put some more divs. I'm going to give this a div with a class of cell. And this is going to represent a cell in my grid. So let's style that cell a little bit. I'm going to come to my style sheet, and I'm going to do a cell here, and I'm going to give it a height of 50 pixels, a width of 50 pixels, and a background color of red for now, just so we can see it. And then I'm going to copy and paste this cell div 8 more times, so we have 9 of them, which is how we're going to create a 3x3 grid. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Nice. Now they're all stacked on top of each other. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give this a border property on this cell CSS class, and I'm going to say 1 pixel space solid, and let's go with green. Let's make this 3 pixels. That's a little bit better. So we can see we've got a 3 pixel border around all of these individual cells. This is how we start laying things out on a page to begin with. We don't just build Facebook, we start placing things on, coloring them, and moving things around. So that's what we're going to want to do now. We're going to want to start moving things around. So I'm going to go to my board div here. I'm going to copy that class name. I'm going to go to my style sheet, and I'm going to give this a style. It's going to have 1 property in here. It's going to say display, and display is going to be flex. And nothing will change just yet, but this is going to be important in a second. The next thing I'm going to do is I probably want to give this an identifier instead of a class. So I'm going to change this class on the grid element. I'm going to change from class to ID, just to demonstrate the difference between a class and an ID in CSS. If I go to my style sheet, we've been using a dot to target CSS classes in our HTML. To target an identifier or an ID, we use a hashtag symbol instead. So I can do hashtag grid, and then that is going to target this element directly. With an ID, it's usually unique. We have 1 thing on the page which has a specific ID, and we can target that in CSS and do something specific for that element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want my grid to be 380 pixels wide. I want it to be 380 pixels tall. And I want to display flex. And now things have kind of moved around a bit. Now there are actually 9 cells in here, but they're all on one line, which is not great. So what I'm probably going to do here is I am going to go back to my cell class, and I'm just going to change the height and the width here. I'm going to say, what's 380 divided by 3? Cool. 120 pixels in height and 120 pixels in width. And then what am I going to change here to get things moving around? My board has display flex. My game area, I haven't added anything to my game area. So let's get the game area element, pull that into our style sheet. And you can put this anywhere. So I've got my game area. I'm going to say position, and I want the position to be relative to the parent element. So the board is the parent element. And let's add a little bit of padding to the game area. Let's say 12 pixels of padding. That's just going to add a little bit of padding around the edges, a bit of breathing room. And then let's go back to our grid identifier here, and let's add a flex-wrap property on here, and let's wrap the cells. So now instead of going all along one line, we've added a wrap, and we've said that the width and the height of the grid needs to be 380 pixels. So we have a perfect square. Each individual cell should be 120 pixels. And then we've told the grid to wrap any elements. So it's put these 3 at the top, and then it's wrapped to the next line. And then we have what looks like a grid. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this border from the cell. And we'll see that now they've all kind of stuck together. We have no breathing room between them. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add to my grid identifier here. I'm going to say justify-content. And the value here is going to be space-between. And that's going to give me a bit of space between all of the cells inside of the grid. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to add an align-content in here. And for anybody that thinks centering things in HTML and CSS is the most complex software problem that they've ever heard of, all you would have to do here is align content center, one line of code, job done. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say space between. This just gives us a nice little even bit of guttering between all of them. It's just adding space between all of the elements inside of the grid. All right, so let's get rid of this background color from the cell, and let's make it look a bit better. In fact, I'm going to add that background color back in, but I'm going to make it white. Let's have some white grids. That looks a bit better. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in our little bug. So I'm going to create a CSS class down here, and we can call it whatever we want. I'm going to call it bug, so .bug. And the only thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull in my bug image. So I'm going to say background-image. And the value of that is going to be URL and then some parentheses. Inside the parentheses, I'm going to put 2 single quotes. And inside the single quotes, I'm going to put the directory and the name of the file. So that's going to be images/bug.png, semicolon at the end. And then I'm going to put this CSS class on one of my cells here. So I've got cell and then a space and then another CSS selector here. And we don't see the bug turn up. I think I know why that might be. Let's just try before I explain it. Yes, there we go. So I needed a // at the beginning of this URL. So we had this before the images directory. This is the images directory. And then the name of the file, bug.png. I put a period and a / here at the start to say from the directory where the style sheet is, which is this overall directory here, go into the images directory. This is a relative directory path. We're just saying from here, go into this other directory. And now we have a nice little bug in one of these squares, but it doesn't look quite right. So let's fix that. Let's go to our cell class here. And let's say background dash size. We're going to change the size of the background image. And we're going to say contain, which is going to contain it to the element. There we go. And let's just make sure that it's definitely in the middle of the element. So we'll say background position, center. And that should be all we need for this. I'll tell you what I also want to do. When I mouse over these cells, I would like it if my cursor changed into a little pointy hand. Just to signify we can click on it. So we could add a cursor property here and give it the value of pointer. Oops. And now when I hover my mouse over any of these, it looks like a little hand. Looks like we can click on it. Just a nice little bit of user experience there. All right. I don't want to spend too much longer on this because we are running low on time and I want to get to the JavaScript. So I'm going to try and I'm going to change this to, let's go with the word splat instead of bug. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to create another CSS class down here called splat. I'm going to copy this line of code right here. And I'm just going to say bugsplat.png instead of bug.png. So now we have a nice little splat image. And now when it comes to JavaScript, we can simply show a bug in one of the cells or hide it. And if it gets clicked on, show the splat image instead. And that gives the illusion that you're splatting bugs when really you're just clicking something and we're changing an image. And that's essentially how games work. They're lying to you. All right. Cool. The next bit I want to do here is I want to have a little section for where I'm going to put my game data. So the things like a countdown timer, things like that. So I'm going to come down here into my game data, and I'm going to give this a few elements. I'm going to give it something called a H1, which is the largest header tag. And then if we type something in here, let's say whack-a-bug. This is displaying over here. It's white. The text, the font is awful. We'll fix that soon. I'm also going to add a P tag, which is for paragraph. And here we might have a little description like crush as many bugs as possible in the time limit. And then I'll add 2 or 3 more elements. I'm going to add a H3 header element, which is a slightly smaller header. And we'll say points. And for now, we'll just put 0 in there. Underneath that, I'll add another H3. And we'll put time. And I'll just put 0 for now. And then underneath this, we're going to have some game over text at the end of the game. So let's add a H4 element. And here we'll just say game over. And then we'll put the score in here as well. The score you got at the end of the game. And let's make this look a little bit better before we get into the JavaScript logic. So I'm going to add maybe a class. Now we'll get to that in a second. We've got our game data class here. So let's just go with that to begin with. In our style sheet, I'm going to go to make sure I haven't put it in here already. I have not. I'm going to add a game data class in here, and I'm going to add a little bit of padding, maybe 12 pixels. Yep, that brings it kind of in line. That's quite nice. And I'm going to add a width. Let's go with 200 pixels. Let's go with 240. Yeah, that looks okay. All right. The next thing I want to do is add a little space between this text here and where the points and the time are. So that text there is a P element. And rather than give that P element a specific class, I'm just going to do what we did with the body class earlier, the body element earlier. And I'm just going to put P in here with some opening and closing curly braces to target all of the paragraph elements in my HTML file. And I'm going to say add a margin dash bottom. So we're going to add a bit of empty space to the bottom of the paragraph. Let's go with 36 pixels. There we go. Nice bit of space in there. And let's also add some space above the H4 where we have the game over. So let's add a H4 in here. Let's say margin dash top. And let's say 28 pixels looks good. Just to separate things out a little bit. Now, the next thing that I want to do here is I want to make the text look a little bit better. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the color. So way up in my body of the CSS, the body element, I'm going to say color. Unfortunately, we need to spell it the American way. We can't put a U in there. And I'm just going to say white. Make the text white. That looks good. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to pull in a font from Google to make the font look a bit nicer. We'll see at the top of the index file, we've got this section right here on line 10. And this is basically pulling in a bunch of Google fonts for us. So we can just apply that into our style sheet. The way we do this is we add a font family property on this, and then in single quotes, we can add the name of a font. We could add that if we want to. I've already picked out a nice little retro font for us. It's called Press Start 2P. There we go. Nice and retro, nice and arcade. We could probably add a little bit of space above the paragraph element as well. Let's do that. Let's add a margin top. Let's just give it 10 pixels just to bring it down a little bit. That looks okay. Pretty happy with that. That looks all right. So the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to get rid of the game over text, because we don't want to actually see that unless the game is over. And so that I can target this HTML element in my JavaScript, I'm going to give this a class called game over. And I'm just going to leave it empty for now. I'm not going to add any CSS. I just want to be able to target it in JavaScript, which we will see soon. So let us get into actually writing some proper code. We have a skeleton in place. We've got a grid. And now we just need to actually do things. So we can pull in all of these HTML elements into our JavaScript code and then manipulate them any way we want to. The way we do that is with something called the document. This is a bunch of documentation on the document. I will share a link in the chat channel if you are interested. This is where you get all of the documentation for JavaScript. And I'm going to be using a few things in here. But before we get into that, let's do a basic expression in JavaScript. So I want to pull in, let's say, my cells, for example. I want to pull all of these cells into my JavaScript file so I can add bugs to them at random. So the way I would do that is I would create something called a variable in JavaScript. And a variable you can think of kind of like a box with a label on it. If you're moving house, you might get all of your kitchen plates, put them into a box, and then write kitchen plates on the box. It's a container for some kind of value. So we could give it a name, anything we want. I'm going to call it cells, then an equal sign, and then something in here. So maybe in double quotes, I'll just write the word something. This is essentially creating a variable. The variable name is called cells, and the variable value is called something. The way we can use that variable is by just typing cells, and then we can do whatever we want with it. In this case, maybe I'll get something printing in the little console down here. I'll just do something called a console log. So that's console dot and then log and then some parentheses. This is called a function. We can give a function something to do something with. I can give the cells variable here, and it will print out something in the console down here. If I change the value of this variable to 42, the answer to everything, we'll get 42 in the console down here. All right, that's the basics of variables. There is a lot more to it than that, but obviously we're running low on time. There are a few keywords that we can use with a variable. I don't want my variable's value to ever change. Once I assign it a value, I want it to always be that value. The way I do that is with the keyword const, which stands for constant. It is constantly this value. I'll call it cells, and I'll give it a value of, for now, just an empty string, while we take a look at some documentation here. If I can get zoom out of the way, there we go. So to navigate this documentation, on the left-hand side, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we might be interested in here. I'm interested in instance methods, which are just functions, things that do things. And I'm looking for something called getElementById right here. So what I can do is I can get a HTML element by its ID. And see, now this makes sense. I changed this class to an ID earlier. I can get this HTML element, all of the things inside of it, and pull this in here. So if I say document dot get element by ID and then put the ID in here, we give it an ID of grid. I might need to put the hashtag in there as well. I do not. I'm going to add a little console log down here, and I'm just going to give it my cells just so I can see something in the console. And we can see now we have a HTML element, which we have access to in code. There's a bunch of stuff in here which probably doesn't make much sense, but we could console log out cells, which is the whole element, or we could do cells dot attributes, which is going to give us some weird, funky object with a bunch of stuff on. We don't need to worry too much about it. The point is here that we're just pulling something from the HTML file into JavaScript, then we're going to do something with it later. Now I am going to use this function a little bit later, but for now I'm going to change this one to something called a query selector. I'm going to call document.querySelector all because I want all of my cells. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to put in here .cell. Get me every single HTML element with the cell CSS class attached to it. Console log that out, and we see now we have a list of HTML elements. They are all divs. They all have the cell class, and we can start working with things from there. I'm going to do this with my other elements. I'm going to grab my game over element. So const game over element equals document.querySelector. I'm going to get the CSS class game over. I'm going to put .game over in here. I'm going to console log that out to make sure that I've got it. I have. Nice. Also going to get my score. I'm going to create a const called score display. That makes sense, kind of. That's going to be document.getElementById, and then I need to put an ID in here, but I haven't actually given it an ID in my HTML file. Now I just want the number here. I don't want the entire text between this H3 tags. So I'm going to add another HTML element in here. It could be any element I want it to be, but I'm going to give it an element name of span. It's going to be a span HTML element. I'm going to give it an ID of, what should we call this one? Score display. I'm going to copy and paste this. Do the same thing with my time. And I'm going to call this one timer display. And now I can target this element directly, and later on I can put a number in the middle if I want to. So let's go back here. I'm going to get element by ID, and I'm going to say score dash display. I'm going to console log that out. Score display. We have our score element. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to copy and paste this line. I'm going to say timer display. Change this here to timer. And I'm just going to console log that out to make sure we've got that. And we have, here it is. Fantastic. We are getting somewhere. So now I've pulled the HTML elements into my file that I need to work with. So the rest of this is just going to be doing things with them. Before I get into doing some logic, I'm going to define some more variables, which are going to help me define the state of the game. So define some game state. And what I'm doing here with this green text, I'm putting 2 forward slashes here, which is a comment, which means that this is not going to run. This line is not going to run. And I'm going to add a few variables here. Now, these variables I do want to change over time because it's going to contain the score, right? I'm going to have a score initially of 0. And at some point, I'm going to change this. When you click on a bug, the score should go up. So instead of const, I'm going to use the keyword let. Let is how we create a variable that can change. I'm also going to do a let for the time left. We'll start the timer at, let's say, 5 for now. And we'll bump that up at the end of the game. And then we'll create another one for the speed of the bug. I'll call it bug speed. And this is going to be in milliseconds, so 800 milliseconds. So every 800 milliseconds, we should see a different cell having a bug on it to give us that little whack-a-mole feel. And then I'm going to create a final one here called game over equals false. And this is the namesake of the people I work for, Boolean. Boolean is a yes or no answer to a question, true or false, or 1 and 0. So this can be true or false. And this is how we essentially decide which path we should go down in code. We'll see it a little bit later on. And then what I want to do is I want to attach this number, the score, to my actual score HTML element here, right? So I want to put whatever the score is inside of this HTML element. Say the score was 500, that should be in there. Since I've pulled that element in to my JavaScript file, I can go to it directly. I can say score display, which is the name of the variable, and then dot inner text equals, for now, let's say hello there. And we'll see that in here now in our little game. And we'll just set it to the value of whatever the score variable is. So now if I change score to 42, we'll see 42 over here on the right-hand side of the screen. Nice. I'm going to do the same thing with my timer display. Timer display dot inner text equals time left, however long is left. All right. So let's start placing a bug in our cells. So I'm going to create something called a function. A function is just a piece of code that you can run whenever you want it to. So we're going to use the keyword function here. We're going to give it a name of, let's go with random bug. And then we have some parentheses and then some opening and closing curly braces. Every piece of code we want to write for this function goes inside these curly braces. This just prevents the rest of the file running everything we write. We'll only run stuff inside this function when we want to, and I'll show you how we do that soon. And essentially what I want to do here is I want to generate a random number between 0 and however many cells we have, 9. And I want to choose one of those at random and then put the bug in there. To put the bug in there, all I need to do is add the bug CSS class to one of these cell elements, right? That's all I really want to do here. That's the problem. I want to choose one of these cells at random and then give it the bug CSS class. Right, so let's generate a random number. I'm going to create a variable inside of here called random number. And that's going to be equal to, this is probably going to be one of the most complex parts of this game. I'm going to use something called math with a capital M, and then I'm going to do dot floor. Inside this, I'm going to do math again, and then dot, and then random with some parentheses. This is going to give me a random number between like 0 and 1, fractional. So let's just console log that random number out. Oops, random number. And we'll see that we're not getting anything in the console yet, and that's because this code is not running, because it's inside of a function. If we want to run the function, then down here we would need to type the name of the function, followed by some parentheses, and that's all we need to do. And we have 0 in here. If I get rid of the math.floor here just for a second, we'll see 0.4, blah, 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 blah. If we reload the page, we see we get some random numbers between 0 and 1. So I want to translate that into 0 through 9, because we have 0 through 8, because we have 9 elements, 9 cells on our page, and in programming we always start at 0 when we have lists of things. The first item in a list is index 0, the last item, obviously. So all we need to do here is times this random number by however many elements we have. We know we've got 9 elements, so we could just put 9 in here. But I'm going to do math.random times cells.length. There we go. This is giving us 4. If we refresh this, we get 4 again, then 3, then 0, then 5, then 6. Nice. That seems to be working. All right. So the next thing we want to do is we just want to get the cell associated with that random number. So we'll go to our cells list up here. And to access something in a list, we use square brackets. So we have the name of the variable and then some square brackets here. Then inside, we put the index of the item in the list. So this first cell right here is index 0. The second one is index 1, index 2, index 3, etc. So if I want to get the first cell, I would do 0 in here. Or I could get the second one by putting 1, etc. Now we have a random number here, so I can stick that in there instead. I'm just going to console log this out just so we can see it. We have an element in here. So at least we know we're getting a HTML element. That's great. Not much use to us right now because we're not doing anything with it. I'm going to save this to a variable called cell. And then below this, I'm going to go to that cell HTML element. I'm going to go to its CSS class list, so .class list. And then I'm going to do a dot, and then I'm going to do add, and then I'm going to add the bug class to that cell. And now if we keep refreshing the page, we'll see the bugs start to move around. Nice. Okay, so let's make it move around without having to refresh the page constantly. So what I'm going to do outside of this function, right at the bottom here, is I'm going to add a new variable, and I'm going to call it bug movement. for example, and I'm going to set this equal to something called an interval using the setInterval function. We need to put two things inside of the parentheses here. One of them is the function that we want to run on an interval. I want to run the random bug function. And then the second one is how often do we want to run it? Now, I already defined a bug speed up here of 800 milliseconds, so we can put that in there. Now, if we do that, we'll see the bugs start to jump around, but it's not removing the previous bug. It's just adding more and more bugs. So let's fix that. What I probably want to do here is create another function. I'm going to call this function remove bugs, which is what we love to do as devs. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my list of cells, look at every single one of them, and just get rid of the bug class from all of them. So I'm going to write something called a for loop. This has similar syntax. We have the keyword for, then some parentheses, and then some opening and closing curly braces. This is how we repeat a line of code. So everything inside here will be repeated. So instead of looking at every single cell manually and performing some logic on it, I can just write the logic for one cell and then repeat it for the rest of the cells. Now we have some funky syntax here. We have three parts to a for loop. So I'm going to create something called an iterator variable. Usually we'll call this I, and we'll set it to 0. And I'm doing this inside the parentheses here. And then I've got a semicolon. The next part of this loop is I'm going to tell it how long do I want it to loop for. I'm going to say keep running while I is less than 9, let's say, because we have 9 cells. And then at the end of the loop, what do I want to do? I want to increase I by 1, so I could do I plus equals 1, or I could do I equals I plus 1, or I could just do I plus plus. This is going to increase I by 1 value. And I'm just going to add a little console log in here, and I'm just going to put I in there so we can see what's going on. I'm going to run the remove bugs function, and then we see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way through to 8. So that console log ran 9 times. So now all I want to do is I want to get my cell, create a constant inside the for loop, call it, let's go with bug cell. We'll set that equal to our entire cells list, then some square brackets, and then put I in there instead. So remember up here on line 19, we put a random number in here to get a specific cell. We're doing the same thing, but we're passing in whatever I is. So we're literally looking now at every single cell in our grid so we can do something with it. And then we're going to do the inverse of what we did here. We added the bug class to it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to remove the bug class from it. And then I'm going to take this function call here, and I'm going to call my remove bugs function right at the top of my random bug function. So before it adds a new bug to the cells, it removes all of the previous ones, and then we have a bug jumping around all of the different cells. And we're starting to look good. Not a lot of code there, 31 lines of code, and we've got something functional. I'm probably going to have to speed up a little bit here so we've got some time for questions. So apologize that I'm glossing over things. It's this kind of thing you would probably build after 2 or 3 weeks of learning to code, not something you would just turn up and be expected to be able to do. So let's move swiftly onwards. The next thing I want to do is I want to let's get the countdown going. So I'm going to create a function called countdown. Let's give it a capital D, countdown. And what I'm going to do inside of here is I'm going to go to my timer display, which I pulled in from the HTML file. I'm going to go to my timer display, and I'm going to set the inner text to, let's go with time left. But I want to decrease the time left, so I'm going to add 2 dashes on front of here. So this is minus. So like we did with the I++ up here, this is increasing I by 1. What I'm doing here is decreasing the time left by 1. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave that like that for now. I'm going to create a constant here called timer. I'm going to set it equal to another interval using set interval. I'm going to give it the countdown function, and I'm going to tell it to run that function every 1 second, 1000 milliseconds. And now we have this timer counting down 1, 0, -1, -2, and it'll just go on forever. So now we want to add a little condition in here to our countdown. We want to stop counting down if the timer is at 0, right? So we can add something called an if statement in here. And this is basically asking our code a question with a yes or no response. So is there any time left? Is the timer at 0? If it's at 0, then let's do something else. So I can say if time left, I think it's called time left. Yep. If time left, and then I'm going to put 3 equal signs. So this is an equality check. Is the time left 0? If it is, for now, I'll just do a console log of hello. We'll see this count down for a few seconds, and then in the console, we'll see the word hello. So we can do something when the timer gets to 0. What we want to do when the timer reaches 0 is we want to set game over equal to true, because the game is over. We want to remove the intervals, stop the intervals from doing anything so that the bug stops jumping around and the timer stops going down. So we'll use something called clear interval here. And inside these parentheses, we will put the name of the interval we created, bug movement here. We can also clear interval this timer interval. And then if we count down to 0, we should now see everything stops. Bug stays still, timer stops counting. We are good. And then the next thing I probably want to do here is go to my game over element. What did I call it? Game over element, of course. And set the inner text to game over. We also want to put the score in there as well. So we can do score. And then after this final single quote here, I'll put a plus sign to say I want to add something onto this string, and I'll just put whatever the value of the score is. I think it's called score. Yes. There we go. Game's over. Your score was 0. Fantastic. So the only thing left for us really to do is to be able to increase the score when we click on a bug. We've got the game over condition. We've got the bug moving around. We just need to be able to click on it now, and then that's it. We have a complete game. So what I'm going to do here is right at the bottom, I'm going to do what we did before. I'm going to loop over every single cell. I'm going to look at every single cell in the grid, and I'm going to add a function to every single one of them so that when we click on it, it'll run that function. So let me just copy and paste this for loop right here. And I'll just get rid of the code that's inside of it. And what I'm going to do inside of this for loop is I'm going to get the current cell. So I'm going to create a constant here called cell. The value is going to be our cells list, and then we'll put I in here. And then I'm going to go to that cell, I'm going to do dot, and then I'm going to add something called an event listener. So I'm going to do add event listener here. Now, an event listener literally listens for a user event. So it could be when a user clicks on something on the page, or it could be when a user scrolls the page, or when the user, if you've ever been on a website and you've tried to close the tab or go to a different tab and it gives you a big pop-up that says, wait, we have an offer to try and sell you. That's listening for a user's mouse going off the screen. And then it's running a function in here. So they have something like this going on. There's two things that we need to do here. We need to tell it the type of event we want to listen for. We do that with a couple of single quotes here, and we want to listen for a click event. When we click on a cell, I want to run a particular function. So we could put a function in here. We don't need to give this function a name. We just type the keyword function, then some parentheses, and then some opening and closing curly braces. And then anything we write in here will get run when we click on the cell. I'll use a console log here. So now if I click on any of these cells, I will get a nice little log in my console to tell me I am actually doing something. But let's do something useful. So let's go to the score display. And let's set the inner text to, let's go with ++ score. So we're setting it to whatever the score variable is, but we're increasing the score variable by 1 before we do that. That's why we have the ++ at the start. We're incrementing the score first, and then we're assigning it to the value of the inner text here. If we put the ++ on the other side, it would assign the value to the inner text, be the original score, and then it would increment it afterwards. So we wouldn't see an accurate score. We would see one behind what it actually is. So I'm going to put the ++ first here. So we increment the score first and then set the value. The next thing I'm going to do, let's just see if the score goes up first when we click on a little bug. It does. It goes up every time we click on any cell, which is not what we want. So let's wrap this in an if statement. Let's say, make sure that the cell has the bug in its CSS class list. So let's go to cell.classList, and let's do .contains, and let's put the bug CSS class in there. And then let's move this inside the if statement here. And now if we click on the cells, we don't get any score unless there is a bug inside the cell. Fantastic. But I can keep clicking that bug even when the game's over and cheat the system. So I'm going to add a second thing to my if statement here. I'm going to say 2 ampersands, which means and. So I'm going to say and game over is not equals to false. So now when the timer runs out, we go to 0, the game is over, I cannot increase my score anymore. That's fantastic. Let's change this to make it a bit easier. Instead of this, I'm just going to do an exclamation mark in front of the game over, which is essentially the same thing. We're just saying not game over. The next thing that we want to do here is we want to go to our cell, we want to go to its class list, and we want to remove the bug because we clicked on it. And instead of showing a bug, we want to show the splat. So let's go to cell, let's go to its class list, and let's add the splat CSS class. And now when we click bugs, we get some splats. The splat stays there. We're not removing the splats, so let's fix that. Let's say we want the splat to disappear after 200 milliseconds. Below here, we can call a function called setTimeout, which is kind of like setInterval. But this one is going to run a function after a specific time rather than every time that you specify. So we'll put a function in here. And all that function is going to do is go to the cell, go to the class list, remove the splat class, and then we're going to run that every 200 milliseconds, or rather we'll run it after 200 milliseconds, and then we see the splat disappears. And we have a functional game. What is left? I think that is pretty much it, unless I'm missing something. No, I think we're good. 62 lines of code, 61 lines of code, and we have a game. If you didn't manage to keep up with that, that's fine. I will make sure that Kim sends out a link with a complete version of the project so that you can compare mine to yours, and maybe you can extend it and tweak it and add your own things, maybe change the images and make it more interesting than just whack-a-mole. If we change the time left up here, you could just experiment with changing the values, and you can just click the bugs. The timer goes down for 30 seconds. Have fun with it. My challenge to you would be, if you feel comfortable, try speeding the bug up over time. Instead of just having a flat 800 milliseconds, maybe every 2 seconds you change that to 700, then 600, and just keep speeding the bug up over time. That'd be pretty cool.